Today, I will be talking about the struggles LGBTQ migrants face when seeking asylum and sanctuary in the U.S. On this slide are some pictures of LGBTQ immigrants living in the U.S. who have fled from violence and persecution in their home countries. Currently, LGBTQ migrants face numerous struggles to seek and be granted asylum. Many are fleeing from their homeland because the government does not protect them from violence, sexual assault, and abuse. However, the U.S. rarely provides safety for LGBTQ immigrants because our immigration system is corrupt. In 2016, there were between 70 to 80 countries that considered homosexuality illegal. In some of these countries, like Nigeria, being homosexual is punishable by death. Even in countries that do not have laws against homosexuality, like Mexico and Guatemala, the LGBTQ community still faces prejudice and oppression. Hundreds of thousands of LGBTQ migrants have fled their homelands, seeking asylum in the U.S. or other pro-LGBTQ countries. In the U.S., LGBTQ migrants suffer from discrimination along their journey to the border and at the border, fleeing from homelands because of violence, sexual assault, and abuse. But the U.S. is not much better for these migrants. Jane Quintanilla, a transgender woman, was forced to flee El Salvador because she was threatened by violence and persecution. However, Ms. Quintanilla was so afraid to cross the border because she was skeptical of rejection and how the Border Patrol agents would treat her. She faced threats of sexual assault and harassment on her journey to the border, where she was picked up by a drug rehabilitation group and that was able to provide her safety. Ms. Quintanilla is not alone in her struggle to seek asylum. Eden Carey Avendano Hernandez, also a transgender woman fleeing from Mexico, was detained in Mexico after being deported because she got a GUI and had entered the U.S. illegally. Eden was raped by border police at the detention center. When her case was processed, the original immigration court judge denied her request for asylum because she was a transgender woman. Thankfully, Eden made it safely to another judge who granted her asylum, but she could have very well been thrown back into detention where she would have been assaulted again. One of the most tragic transgender deaths was the fault of Border Patrol treatment towards a transgender woman. Roxana Hernandez fled from violence and discrimination in Honduras. When she was detained, as she waited for her case to be processed, she was beaten brutally, denied water, and denied appropriate medical care for her HIV condition. Roxana unfortunately passed away as a result of this harsh treatment from Border Patrol. The 2016 report by the Human Rights Watch, an organization that helps promote human rights for all, revealed that in most detention centers there was pervasive sexual harassment and assault, as heard directly from transgender women. One social structure that perpetuates LGBTQ migrants' struggle to seek asylum is the policies in immigration court, which force LGBTQ migrants to prove their sexual identity in order to be granted asylum. Migrants have to hide their sexual identity in their homeland to escape persecution. Eden Hernandez, the woman I talked about previously, is one LGBTQ migrant who had to hide her sexuality, but unfortunately she still faced a lifetime of abuse. So, when immigration judges base their decisions on witnesses and outside factors, a lot of the time LGBTQ migrants are not granted asylum because the court doesn't believe they're being honest about their sexual identity. Eden's first immigration judge rejected her claim to asylum because they would not accept her sexuality. Immigration judges also use humiliating questions such as a migrant's in-bed activities as a way to determine whether they should enter the U.S. Migrants don't exactly know how to answer these questions when asked by an immigration judge, and then this results in the judge becoming suspicious, which results in a judge decision to deny the migrants' right to asylum. Then these migrants are sent back to the dangerous environment they face at home, and this is exactly how the policies immigration judges use to determine LGBTQs migrants' asylum grants are unjust and result in more harm done to LGBTQ migrants. Judges also have been known to rely upon gender stereotypes, which is not fair to LGBTQ migrants because all transgender, gay, lesbian, bi, or queer migrants present themselves differently. Immigration judges also pressure LGBTQ migrants into explicitly defining their gender when their process may be different in their home country. A man from Ghana was put in more danger as a result of the immigration's approach in figuring out whether he was gay or transgender when he was trying to figure out whether the man should be granted asylum because the judge pressured him to define whether he was gay or transgender, but he hadn't discovered that yet. The judge then became suspicious and the man struggled to make his claim for asylum. As a result of the reputation of rejection by immigration courts, many LGBTQ migrants also fear crossing the border, which puts them in more danger because they aren't escaping the violence. The other social structure that I looked at which perpetuates LGBTQ migrants' struggle to seek asylum is ICE and Border Patrol's treatment towards LGBTQ migrants. Detention center guards abuse and sexually assault LGBTQ migrants, violating their human right to a safe environment. Eden Hernandez was a victim of rape from Border Patrol officers, among many other transgender women that have been put in detention centers. In most detention centers, there is sexual harassment towards LGBTQ migrants. A transgender woman fleeing Honduras who asked for anonymity woke up one morning to a man forcing himself onto her, but the Border Patrol guards did nothing to stop the man, just told the woman to ignore it. However, the woman did not know whether or not to continue suffering from this treatment or report it because she could get in trouble for physical contact violations if she reported it. This is an example of an oppressive double bind many LGBTQ migrants face in detention centers because they don't want to undergo any more suffering, but they don't want to get in trouble for physical contact violations. This woman's struggles show how there is very few real safe spaces for migrants, even in the U.S., which is supposed to be a place of sanctuary. Roxana Hernandez's story about being denied the proper treatment as a result passing away shows how much harm Border Patrol is doing to LGBTQ migrants. The warnings, as Ms. Cantanilla had heard about, also veer LGBTQ migrants away from coming to the border and seeking asylum, and as a result, they're stuck in the violence and persecution allowed in their homeland, as I discussed earlier. Call to family, community, and participation can be applied to LGBTQ migrant struggles because it calls all humans to take on the responsibility to ensure that all people's rights are protected and as a result their sense of human dignity is promoted. When we create a society that promotes human dignity, we are getting closer to the common good, otherwise known as when all humans can reach human dignity and their full potential. We are all interconnected, so we must, quote, serve one another with the gifts you have received, end quote, as it says in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10. By using our gifts that we have, such as shelter, money, our degrees, etc., we can help LGBTQ migrants feel their sense of dignity once again. Call to family, community, and participation also calls us to the responsibility for those who are able to protest, donate, and directly represent LGBTQ migrants in court to do so, because these are the ways LGBTQ migrants' rights can be secured. Our participation to create a society that promotes LGBTQ migrants' rights is rooted in doing contributive justice. Contributive justice stresses the duty of all who are able to help create goods, services, and other non-material or spiritual values necessary for the welfare of the community. By serving LGBTQ migrants in some of the ways I discussed earlier, we are fulfilling our duty in creating services and structures that provide for the welfare of the LGBT community and as a result, the common good. Call to family, community, and participation not only calls its citizens to take responsibility for unjust structures, but also the government, and this is also known as subsidiarity. Subsidiarity says that decision-making should be done by and informed by those who are closest and most affected by the issue, mainly local citizens. However, it also calls upon the more powerful decision-makers like government to listen closely to the people they need and step in when it is appropriate. An example of this that applies to the struggle of LGBTQ migrants is when a local organization in Mexico near the border, like National Immigrant Justice Center, is providing shelter for an LGBTQ migrant, but this migrant needs to enter the U.S. in order to receive full protection from the persecution they face. This is when larger powers like the government are called to help LGBTQ migrants by granting them an asylum claim. A quote from the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church expertly summarizes the idea of government intervention to promote the common good. It states, "The responsibility for attaining the common good, besides falling to individual persons, belongs also to the state, since the common good is the reason that political authority exists." Solidarity can also be applied to LGBTQ migrants, because similar to call to family, community, and participation, it calls us to stand as one human family. Solidarity is a choice to stand with every human as brothers and sisters and take on their struggles as our own in order to work towards justice. Ubuntu, or I Am Because We Are, summarizes Solidarity's main message about our interconnectedness and our responsibility to take care of each other because we cannot exist without each other. Local communities, as well as the government, need to choose the path Solidarity calls us to pursue in standing with LGBTQ migrants. Solidarity also calls us to act in kinship, or the idea that we stand with those who are struggling and give them what they think they need. Citizens like you or me can show kinship to migrants by volunteering at shelters and or being an ambassador for the National Justice Immigration Center, something I will discuss more about in my action slide. We have to get proximate to LGBTQ migrants in order to fully understand how they are suffering and what we can do. And by getting proximate, this will allow us to provide LGBTQ migrants with what they think they need. The government can also show kinship to LGBTQ migrants by giving them what they need in detention centers and immigration courts. For example, the government can pass policies at forced detention centers to give LGBTQ migrants the necessary resources to live with most of their human rights secured. Verse 26 in chapter 12 of 1 Corinthians states that if one member of Christ's body suffers, all suffer, and if one member is honored, all rejoice. This quote embodies the call Solidarity asks us to fulfill, that we must help the suffering of others because we suffer with them, but when they rejoice, we also rejoice because their suffering has ended. Society must help LGBTQ migrants and not neglect them because they can greatly benefit our country. The Center for American Progress, or CAP, projects that immigrants and their children will account for 85% of net growth in the U.S. workforce in the year 2030. The question we should be asking ourselves when contemplating whether we should take up responsibility to help LGBTQ migrants in their struggle to seek asylum is not, what will happen to me if I stand with them, but rather, what will happen to them if I don't? Solidarity calls us to stand with LGBTQ migrants in their fight for freedom in the U.S. If one is not convinced to stand with LGBTQ migrants, just think about the net growth in the U.S. workforce. A little enlightened self-interest. The National Immigrant Justice Center, or NIJC, fights against the unjust conditions LGBTQ migrants face when seeking asylum. The NIJC combats the unfair immigration court policies by providing legal services for LGBTQ migrants suffering from a multitude of injustices, like Border Patrol abuse and violence in their home country. They directly fight the immigration court with individual cases, but they also file lawsuits against policies that deny LGBTQ immigrants basic human rights. The NIJC combats the abusive ICE and Border Patrol treatment towards LGBTQ immigrants by 1. Removing immigrants from the hostile detention centers, And 2, directly addressing ICE and their treatment towards LGBTQ migrants by supporting policies that suggest a cut in Border Patrol's budget. The NIJC work aligns with the participation aspect of Call to Family, Community, and Participation because they are fighting the structures that maintain dehumanizing treatment towards LGBTQ migrants and instead promoting structures that promote human dignity and the common good. The NIJC's work also aligns with Solidarity because they get proximate to LGBTQ migrants' conditions. They provide legal services for LGBTQ migrants facing all different struggles, such as asylum, marriage rights, etc. One direct action the NIJC is taking to stop the abusive treatment in detention centers is creating a policy brief that supports a defund in ICE's budget. Not only is the NIJC comprised of lawyers and adults, though, many students like you and me at SHP can become ambassadors for the organization or be interns and learn how the organization runs. We can make a difference in an LGBTQ migrant's life. We just have to be willing to get proximate and get uncomfortable. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.